before becoming a research professor in the political science department at the University of New Mexico, Dr. Emil Nakli was a senior intelligence service officer at the CIA. He's an expert on political Islam, including radicalization and terrorism. And he is also the director of the Global and National Security Policy Institute at UNM as well. Correspondent Gwyneth Dolan sat down with Dr. Nakli this week to talk about the massacre in Orlando, the changing nature of terrorism in the United States, and what our government can do to prevent it.
Dr. Emil Nakli, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
This massacre in Orlando, along with the shootings in San Bernardino and a few years ago in Fort Hood, these have made it painfully clear how vulnerable we are to attacks that might be inspired by ISIL or other groups, but they are committed by Americans on American soil. What is going on here? What does this say about the nature of the threat and how it's changed?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very important question that has been really occupying the nation since the massacre. And the short answer is that the nature of terrorism, assuming there is a connection between Mateen, the shooter in Orlando, and ISIS or any other international group, that the nature of terrorism has changed. Whereas Al-Qaeda used to be from top down, they would give the orders from above and highly centralized. Now we see ISIS is from the bottom up. They give authority to these people to act wherever they are without any control, without any decision from the central leadership. And that makes it very dangerous because the nature of this change, whereas Al-Qaeda was vertical, if you will, ISIS is horizontal. Whereas Al-Qaeda used to go from the global to the local by establishing franchise groups, ISIS is going from the local to the global.
One of the things that we've seen is ISIL and other groups encouraging people to go buy assault rifles and commit acts that way because these powerful firearms are very easy to buy and they're very inexpensive and you don't need any specialized training. What challenges does that pose to the intelligence community trying to find these people?
It's very difficult, actually. Having worked in the intelligence community, I can tell you it's very difficult to spot the so-called lone wolf because these people now do not require a person to radicalize them, as in the days of Al-Qaeda. They did not require where they used to...
No personal contact.
Yes, exactly, like a radical cleric or somebody of that sort to radicalize them. Now they can be radicalized in their own bedroom using their own computer, their own smartphone, and they can read. And so what we therefore need to look at is the change in their behavior. And that's why it's so difficult, and we need the families and the community to tell us about the change in the behavior of their children, because there's always a change in behavior.
Well, you know, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, Donald Trump, reacted to this shooting in part by suggesting he would expand his plan to bar Muslims from entering the country and also saying that we need to expand surveillance of mosques and Muslim communities to find these links. Is that something we should be doing?
Of course it's not. I mean, that to me reflects two things. Reflects ignorance of the realities and reflects divisiveness of the society and runs contrary to what our leaders, especially at DHS, have been doing in reaching out to the community. What NYPD, for example, has done is very, very good, reaching out to the Muslim community to make people feel that they belong to the city. And so it was Muslim informers who informed the authorities about a couple of potential terrorists because they said New York City belongs to them. And this is something that we have been doing for now over 10 years. What the presidential candidate is doing is to undo all of that. That will certainly make us less secure and less safe than the other way around.
You know, let's talk about people on the terrorism watch list. We did see some conversation about this yesterday. The NRA mentioned it. Donald Trump mentioned that he wants to change that, which was, I think, unexpected.
Right.
Even though felons and people convicted of domestic violence cannot buy guns, people on the terrorism watch list can. And now the Senate is looking at proposals to stop that, but also to go further and prevent people who've been on the list at any time for the past 5 years, as Omar Mateen had been. These lists are not perfect.
No.
And they could possibly restrict the rights of innocent people. How do we balance this? Would it prevent more attacks?
Of course, it would prevent more attacks if you follow the commonsensical approach. No fly, no buy. This is the name of this legislation that's in Congress. If you cannot fly for whatever reason, if you are on that list, there is no way on God's earth that you should be able to buy an assault rifle, period. And that also, of course, brings the whole issue of gun control. I am not talking about hunting guns or hunting rifles. We are talking about these assault weapons that are military weapons by nature. There is no room for this type of weapon in this society.
Well, we have seen problems with the no-fly list and innocent people on it. There's a competing proposal to delay the sale for a few days. Would 3 days be enough time for the intelligence community to figure out if this person is safe or not, or is 3 days not enough time?
Well, any delay is good. Better than no delay at all. The instant purchasing, it is really, to me, very, very damaging in the long run. So any delay, if it's 3 days, if it's 5 days, that assumes that there is close cooperation between domestic intelligence services, namely the FBI, and foreign intelligence services, namely the CIA. And it seems to me, in the article I just published yesterday about this thing, is that we have to ask the question, what kind of cooperation exists? If cooperation is there, and we expand and deepen this cooperation, then the 3 days would be fine. It's better 5 days, it's better 1 week, it's better no purchasing at all. So any delay would help if cooperation exists.
So, you know, you mentioned earlier that it's really hard to identify these type of lone wolf actors who've perpetrated not only these terrorist attacks, but also these other mass shootings that took place in Charleston and in Oregon and other places like that. One risk factor appears to be domestic violence. Right. More than half of the killers in mass shootings over the past 6 or so years also killed a spouse or family member in that mass shooting. And 16% of those killers had previously been charged with domestic violence. I read today that experts say both terror attacks and domestic violence are attempts to provoke fear and assert control. Is domestic violence the kind of red flag that the intelligence community is looking at when trying to find these lone wolves?
Definitely. In fact, the article you referred to was published in the New York Times today, and the article draws a clear link between domestic violence and potential terrorist or mass shootings. Whatever the phrase you use is killing a huge number of people and instilling fear in communities. So, in fact, this behavioral change I was talking about is reflected in domestic violence. I mean, if there is domestic violence, that should be reported. And that raises a question or the point that we cannot address this unilaterally in a vacuum. It has to be a comprehensive approach between domestic violence, so therefore psychological problems with that person and potential violence. I mean, we've known that for years, right? That if a person has proclivity to domestic violence, invariably it leads to violence.
Let me ask you about these words. You know, this is a very complicated case, Orlando. We have seen people talking about a mass shooting, people calling it a terrorist attack, people calling it a hate crime. Meanwhile, there's been conversation between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and President Obama about using the phrase is radical Islam. does it matter what words we use?
Well, it does. I mean, phrases matter because they reflect the ideological position of the speaker. When a person uses hate crime that is against a certain group of people because of their sexual orientation, that means that person supports these people. A person who does not support the rights of the LGBT community would not use hate crime.
So would someone who is like Hillary Clinton in favor of gun control, that's why she's using the words mass shooting
Yes.
instead of terrorism?
And the emphasis, therefore, is on guns. I mean, we could have terrorists, of course, but if they don't have access to these assault weapons, then their violence invariably would be less than the violence that we saw in Orlando.
Dr. Emil Nakli, thank you so much for being with us today and talking about this.
You are most welcome. Thank you.